Okay, so how do you deal with late in the project changes that
Yeah.
aren't just like, maybe hey, I want to change this door and stuff. I mean, because even with this project, we've evolved, had a couple of like, hey, can you change these doors from 36 to 42 because concerned about carts coming through and stuff like that, which, those are fine. You can kind of, thankfully, with Revit or whatever else you're using, you can change the door parameters and
Yeah. Swap out the family, whatever.
yeah, do your due diligence. Go back and make sure that the product that you're specifying actually carries a 42-inch door in a 90-minute rating. Little simple crap like that. But gets you thinking of like, okay, so there's been many a times in many a projects throughout the course of our careers that they will ask us for a change that isn't just, oh, hey, I've been thinking about these doors, let's change these doors, but more something like, oh, hey, by the way, I know that you're a few months away from submission or completion, but we've completely rethought the way that this floor plan works
Yeah.
and we want to rechange it.
Or
And
a new president comes on board at a local community
oh my God,
college,
yes.
or
Yeah.
a user group completely changes, or somebody retires, or yeah. And
Yeah.
these are the
Yeah.
big things.
Which is funny is that you just highlighted just a few of those. And I think I've actually gone through every
Every one of
single one
those.
of those.
Yeah, exactly.
And and so you got to wonder, it's like when things like that happen, not only is it something that's okay, it's scatter, everybody let's start, figuring out, okay, well, what does this mean? What are the ramifications of it? What are the things are affected by this change?
Hmm.
Some of my older projects have kind of like dealt with blows like, and I've even gotten where you've completed a project and they're like, oh, by the way, we're not going to occupy this floor. Like, well, why aren't you going to occupy that floor? Well, we just hired on a new program for this particular school, and this school wants to use this floor, but the way that they were going to use that floor isn't the way.
Yeah.
I put a I There was one project that I did where we had designed it for basically observational reviews and like debrief rooms and things like that. Well,
Hmm.
and so the whole floor plate was all of that. And they're like, you know what? I think we want a robotics lab.
I'm just laughing because I've been through this exact same thing.
And you're just like, wait, a
You're,
robotics lab?
you just
I
want to
mean,
hear like the record screach sound effect out loud
exact.
so that everybody can hear it at the same time, so that everybody's like, oh, something just went down. Right? Because usually the people saying that are completely oblivious.
Well, it's just like, okay, yes, the user group that wants it is going to need it, and it needs it like the way that they want it laid out. But the problem is that start thinking to yourself, okay, first of all, was the building structured? What type of robotics lab? Are we going to be exceeding any of the design loads based off of that? So you find out, oh, it's smaller stuff. Okay, well, so what type of IT, AV, or heat loads will we occur in here that we need? And they're like, oh, it's this, 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 and this. And you're like, well, crap. The way that it's designed right now, it means that we're going to actually have to add capacity to a unit that currently right now doesn't have capacity in that unit. And we're going to have to upsize it. And then,
Right.
by the way, that particular unit that feeds this particular space is sized exactly to a point where there's no additional noise or vibration loading on the building, because immediately below that space is the executive conference room. And so you're like, okay, well, you don't want like the noise transmission when the thing cranks up and all this other stuff. And it was specifically designed for being, like whisper quiet after, with spring isolation and all that other stuff, and additional insulation between the members and stuff. And you hope that when you add more to it, that it's going to suffice, but never know until you actually get there and start testing it.
Right.
And so it gets you thinking. It's just like we deal with this all the time where people change their mind on the use or the layout or things like that. And it's just, how do you deal with that change? I mean, you hope it's not like, and you start screaming and yelling and stuff like that, or you just, it's just like, well, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
The ones that always concerned about, and am curious how you've dealt with these in the past, it was like when they're late, let's just throw out there that you're like 2 months away from the completion of your documentation and getting ready for submission for your and they come in and they say, hey, oh, by the way, we want to change the layout of this floor.
Yeah, what do you do? I mean, you just do it, right? That's the thing is there is never an option usually to just say no, because I mean, this is part of your contract, right? Which is to make it what they want when it's ready to build. And like there are revisions built into that contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
To get it to be what it needs to be. Now, obviously there's going to be some additional services potentially in there because it isn't what you guys originally programmed, or what was signed off on the different milestones throughout design, which is fine, but that doesn't change the fact that you still have to do it, right?
Well, so let me just ask this. So you put into the caveat that, well, changes in the design are things that you're responsible for. However, so you probably, will go through conceptual design, have them review it and say, okay, I think this is the right track, sign off on that, then go through schematic design, then go through design development. And at that point, if you've got all of these sign-offs, construction documentation in the traditional sense, you should not be changing your design.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you're hoping for them to just say, we're done with design. It's exactly what we want. And so you go. And you're going, you're moving forward, you're getting everything done. And then they say, oh, by the way, we want to offer up all of this input where we want to redesign it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is this is just one of these, some people will just say, okay, I'll do it, and try to incorporate the design into it and get it all, pushed as part of the design.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start looking at the complexities of different types of buildings and things like that, it's not like, okay, you told me what you want, kind of the layout that you wanted, and we had that meeting, and I understand your intent, but not only do I have to test fit it, but now I actually have to go back a couple of times with you guys, at least once, if not more, to fine tune it, make sure that it's good to go. So now we're eating into this 2 months.
Right.
And then by the time they say, okay, I've given you the blessing of this is the design that I want, now basically go through the full engineering to make sure that everything is set and good to go. You've got to redo all of your ductwork, redo all of your plumbing above, overhead, redo all of your fire protection, redo, you name it. It's up there most likely, and it needs to be redone because it's not just, oh, I want to put this room here and this room here, which is probably not a big deal. But if it's a wholesale change, you just wonder, when do you throw up the red flag? Some, like I said, some people don't. They just say, we'll get it done.
Yeah. So I don't know anybody who has said they're not going to do it. I guess I should put that out there. All the projects that I've worked on or that I know of, they absolutely have gone through those changes. And the biggest reason is they want to keep the client, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big driver. You can't disregard that part of it, because it's like, do you want to make this client happy? Do you want them to refer you? Do you want them to come back to you? There's so many different ways that could play out in the future. Do you want another architect taking over this project because you refuse to do it, right? And then, whatever comes out of that disaster, most likely, are you willing to have your name attached to that disaster at that point because you weren't willing to play ball? And honestly, we've seen how much designs can absolutely change and how flexible the process actually is. Is it painful because you're married to the idea or because you don't want to do the work again? Absolutely. There's no denying that part of it. But man, you've also seen it where the entire thing changes in a big way. I mean, I'm actually even thinking of a project, not one that we worked on, but the Lucas Museum. I think it's in its third location that I'm aware of. I think it was in Seattle, it was in San Francisco, then it was in Chicago, now it's in LA. And every design by MAD was completely different, MAD Architects. And
Okay.
and they took that way through the process and then had to start over with a new location. And it's that's an extreme, right? But I'm talking more let's say you've got a student housing project with a podium and 4 stories, and then they're nope, we want it to be 7 and we want the footprint to get smaller. And it's will you do that? It's yeah, well, we can do that. We absolutely can do that. Are you willing to pay for that? Is the question.
Well, that's the question, and that's actually more of where I was trying to lead the conversation. Is not necessarily. I mean, everybody deals with changes. I mean, hell, I mean, I'll give you a good example is the current building that I'm working on. I can't even remotely tell you how many different changes we had. There was one point in time early on in the process where we had 8 different individual Revit models for 8 completely different designs for the project in its exact location of where it's at. We got to the point where we just realized that it would be too cumbersome to try to do thousands of different different design iterations within one model. So we basically just did a series. We created one model, and then here's one where we're going to tweak it, where we're going to cut a few floors off. Here's one where we're going to add a few floors. Here's one where the programs of the floors are going to be completely different than what this one or this one's going to be. And so it sounds a little insane, but it was insanity that kept our sanity rather than us doing that. Now, so I understand those changes, and those are changes that I would call early on.
Yeah,
in the
those are
design
early on.
process.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah,
I'm more referring to the design changes late in the process.
yeah,
When you're in construction documents, when
Right.
you're almost ready for submission for permit and bid. And what do you do then? I mean, I didn't actually mean to insinuate that if I was in this situation, which, I have been in the past, but that I wouldn't do the project. I'm just saying, how do people react when a project like that happens? Do they eat it and just try to get those changes done under basically the fees that they already have and the time that they already have, just so that they can keep the
Yeah.
client happy?
Right.
So
Yes.
that because they know that they are going to probably, let's say this is an institution you're going to do work for, over and over again, or you're expecting a good review from that one when you use that particular project as a reference for something else. And so we always sit back and we ask ourselves, okay, we've been asked to do these changes. How are we going to deal with them? What are we going to do? I mean, are we going to ask for additional services? Are we going to ask for additional time? Are we going to eat it? Are we not going to ask for any additional time? What happens when when you decide as the architect you don't want to, ask for additional time, or you don't want to ask for additional money, but got your engineers who come by and say, hey,
Yeah.
I completely engineered this entire area, and now you're asking me to change it again. I'm going to have to add more time to this. I'm going to have to add more whatever to this, so, I guess I'm just more curious about what.
I'm laughing because that it happens, right? So
It does
the
happen.
only way that you can actually even take this on is to take it on as it comes. You
Mhm.
can't it's very difficult to kind of proactively ahead of time say, here's our policy no matter what. Like those are just asterisks that people cannot abide by because there are so many variables in this equation. And so as long as I think you decide together as a complete team, write down the reasons why things changed and who's going to pay for them and come to those agreements when it before the work actually happens, rather than just say, yeah, we can do that, because that
Mhm.
sucks for the team, right? When somebody who is in a quote unquote leadership position says, yep, we can do that, and doesn't ask anybody else on the team if it can be done, that's really bad culturally, morale, all kinds of things.
Oh yeah, that was.
Um, and then there's just no way to kind of just say, here's how we're going to handle all of those things that come up, because you just can't foresee that kind of stuff. And it even takes me to like the VE situation, right? VE is neither, right? It's neither value nor engineering, right? It's just like, how can we cut money out of this project? And to me, those are the kinds of changes like you have to deal with because you're trying to hit a certain budget. And it's super painful because you just end up, it's either, we say death by 1,000 cuts, or you lop off an entire wing of a building because you want to avoid the death by 1,000 cuts. And can everybody live with that? We see all of this stuff. And then I start to think like, why don't we do this in school, right? Why don't they teach this in school where you get to the 8th week of your 10-week quarter and the professor comes in and says,
great.
Here's changes. Here's the changes I want you to. And that does happen like on a desk crit kind of a level, right? It's like, well, have you thought about it this way, right? There's all like that theoretical stuff, but then there's like the way more practical stuff, which is like, it's somewhere between changing the door sizes and have you looked at this building upside down, right? It's like, okay, you've got $5 million less because the bond didn't pass, right? So what are you going to do about it? And get proactive about new constraints and solving the problem so that it still satisfies the contract, the expectations, whatever you want to call it, right? But that would be a proactive way to kind of start to address this real deal pain that people feel in our profession, especially when you get towards the end of that finish line and it happens when, they say changes that happen early are cheap. Changes that happen late are very, very expensive.
It goes back to the way that I also kind of liken the errors that you make in the documents that the architect catches are free to correct.
Yeah.
It's when the contractor catches it when it becomes really expensive. And that is the exact same adage as what you just said, is like early on, you're almost expected that you're going to have, several rounds of changes and tweaks and modifications. And the later and later it goes, the more and more damaging to the project schedule. If they're minor, you can roll with minor changes. If they're major changes, I recall one project where we decided to, because a couple of principal investigators dropped out of the project, we had designed everything to custom tailored to their exact desires. They dropped out of the project. What do we do? Do we continue to build it out this way? I was like, no, because if we build it out this way, the next PI will not want to do it the same way.
Right.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to just shell that space and have you,
generify.
But have you at least have 4 walls in there, and then during construction, what we'll end up doing is we'll have you guys.
We'll do a TI.
Exactly. We'll have you guys meet with the next PI that we get, and then fit that one. But then you're just hoping that that person that's coming in, is going to have the same kind of like lab gas requirements or this, that, or the other, and just all these silly little things that you didn't think about until you got into that position of completely just like gutting and starting over. It is some interestingly silly stuff that I guess in a way where I was leading the conversation was wanting to know, obviously you've dealt with this. How have you dealt with it? And then just, I'm just curious how other people have dealt with it. How do people how do people roll with the punches? Deal with the change.
Well, let's put the question out there. Hit us up on Twitter, people.
Yeah.
At Archispek, ARCHISPK.
And so when I say, how do you deal with changes? I'm not necessarily talking about those early changes. I'm talking about
and
those
we're not
changes.
talking about paint color.
Yeah, we're not talking about paint color because those can change all the time. But
late big changes. Yeah.
Late big changes. Big changes.